The film's director, Chesley Heimsfeld, is here tonight to share her incredible personal story and explain how you can get involved directly. Tonight we also have Santa Barbara County Supervisor Doss Williams. Like most of you, I've known Doss for many years, and I've always had the highest respect for his energy and his willingness to help the community in so many ways. But we're really on a hot streak. It doesn't end there. We've got with us tonight two remarkable representatives of what I consider the future of medicine. I hope is the future of medicine. This is Dr. Joseph Smith, a chiropractic doctor of neurology from Marin County, and we have Ovid Amate, president and CEO of Solve ME, a strong advocate group that we need. I've had the privilege recently of interviewing and talking at length with both of them, and I think you'll be inspired by what they have to say. Okay, I have a question for you. How many of you have ME or have had long COVID or know somebody that did? That's most of the hands in this room. It's pretty amazing. Yet we don't really know exactly what it is. And that's more or less what we are, that mystery we're seeking to solve. What some of you, most of my career, I've been an investigative reporter. I've done a lot of science things and like that. But what some of you may not know is I took a little bit of time out at one point in my career, and I wrote speeches for the mayor of Los Angeles and for the governor of California. It was fun. There was a lot of action. I've written a novel since then. Many people say the speech writing was my first foray into fiction. Okay, I've always tried to read, when I wrote speeches for them, you try to open it up with a little humor if you can. For example, when the mayor got a very big introductory flower introduction, I would have him say, "Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It's one my father would have appreciated and my mother would have believed." So when Chesley asked me to do this event, I immediately went to Google and I looked up long COVID jokes. Guess what?
There are none.
There are none. Now, if you look up COVID-19 jokes, there are thousands. Because when we're comfortable with something, when we know something, we turn it into humor. For example, COVID-19 joke. 6 months into the COVID quarantine, the dog looked up at his master and said, "Now you know why I chew on the furniture." We know COVID-19. We accept that as real. We don't psychologize it. And so we can put it into our current of humor. And that's one thing that we are aiming at, is to get long COVID and ME and some other diseases accepted by the medical community, by the general public, by the political community, by the legal community, and by the comedians. Okay? So, part of the problem is the names. There is fibromyalgia, which at least we've heard of before, right? We've heard of that one? Does anybody know what it means? And recently, long haulers morphed into post-acute COVID, which was PAC, which we understood, and then Dr. Fauci changed it to post-acute sequelae COVID, or PACIS. Well, who can pronounce that? So that's the way it has gone. It has gone into something we don't understand, something we can't say, something we can't spell. ME, for example, let's see.
I can tell you if you want me to tell you what it is.
Well, hold on. ME stands for?
Myalgic encephalomyelitis.
Okay, that last one has 7 syllables. Gives you brain fog just talking about it. This does have a point. This is what we're up against. We're up against confusion. We're up against doctors throwing their hands up. 200 symptoms for long COVID. Doctors throwing their hands up. They refer, right? They refer on to another doctor, or they say, It must be in your head. It must be you. You are at fault for having this, not me, because I don't understand it, okay? In that book, which is free, by the way, please take a copy home for if you want to. It was a book I did 2 years ago on long COVID. It was the first book to come out. But I interviewed doctors from Mount Sinai, from NIH, from Mayo Clinic, from Johns Hopkins, from Stanford, all over the world, Europe, Africa, and I asked them a question. Is long COVID real? Or is it in the patient's head? Every one of them said it is real. That's what we're doing here tonight. We want to create a documentary that shows this is something that is real. It has a physical cause. We need to take it as seriously as we take cancer. We need to give people who have this disease dignity. We need to give them truth. And we need to allow them to come out of the shadows. What the documentary is about ultimately is rebranding. I know all of us have been through this rebranding thing when we have businesses, right? How are we going to brand our business? Well, that's kind of what we're doing here. We're going to brand a disease. We're going to brand, and the documentary will be taking us into some of the most progressive companies in the country. And we'll say, how did you brand your product? We want to brand a disease. We want to then take it into Congress and say, guess what? We've got a disease that's real. We need money for treatments and cures. Ultimately, we want to get rid of the shame that people feel having this disease, because the doctors will say it's in their head. It's not in their head. Then we want a diagnosis. Then we want treatments and cures. I had a whole lot more to say about this, but at this point, I think that it's prudent to give this over to Chesley to tell us her story and more about the documentary. But I just want to say this is a movement we're joining, and it's a cause worth fighting for.
This is a very exciting place for me. I just want to say I am super happy to be here. I want everyone in this room to know that we are all friends. They were all on a common mission together, and we have a lot to do, but I am confident we can do this. Because all of us are in some way affected, whether we have this illness ourselves, an illness that is referred to as the disease of 1,000 names. And why is it referred to as the disease of 1,000 names? Which I think is quite clever, actually. It's good branding. Well, I'll tell you why. I want to give you a little bit of the history to this so that you can actually understand why you being here today is so important. It is of historic importance. In 1955, in the UK, there was an outbreak in the Royal Free Hospital in London. And 300 nurses and doctors became very sick with flu-like symptoms, and they had to be hospitalized in their own hospital. And they, in fact, shut it down because they didn't want anyone else coming in and being exposed to whatever this ailment was. So one of the doctors there ended up terming this myalgic encephalomyelitis, or what came to be termed ME. And what does that mean? That means swelling of the brain and spinal cord, which is what he observed in his patients. Quite a severe symptom. Then in 1984, has anyone been to Incline Village, Nevada, near Lake Tahoe? Yes. It's a really beautiful place. I'm not sure if you're aware, but in the 1980s, there was an outbreak there where 160 predominantly women and young girls fell very ill with, flu-like symptoms, this mysterious set of symptoms that has become very common now in our dialect. And so they failed to fully recover. 2 local doctors there, Dr. Cheney and Dr. Peterson, brought in the CDC. The CDC begrudgingly came in, studied the people who were sick, and left town, never even bothered to call them again. Shortly thereafter, a few years later, they ended up having a convention where they claimed that this was, and termed it, the chronic fatigue syndrome. So that's what became known as CFS. When the media got a hold of that, they dubbed it the yuppie flu. Has anyone heard of the yuppie flu? Okay. So it was also termed Raggedy Ann syndrome, fibromyalgia. There are a list of a myriad of different names: chronic Epstein-Barr, chronic Lyme disease. These all share morbidities in common, and there are a variety of different names. So we are on a mission to rebrand. And I want to tell you just a little bit about me personally, because I hear that's important. So I suffer from this myself. And I've had this, whatever we want to call it, for 25 years now. So when I was a freshman in college, 18 years old, I see there's a graduation happening this weekend, right? And it's really exciting. You see all these young people running around. They're so happy, they're looking forward to their futures. Well, when I graduated college, I'd already been sick with this mysterious illness for 3 years of my life. And you know, it took me a decade to get a diagnosis, a decade, 10 years in the United States of America. And I come from a well-known medical scientific family, and it was hard for me. Okay, there are people right now today who have long COVID, who have ME that's developed from having COVID-19 and any other number of these related illnesses, and they cannot get a diagnosis. So, why are we making this documentary? We're making this documentary to destigmatize, to demystify a myriad of these illnesses that are devastating people across the country, across the world, millions of people. And there's an incredible urgency with it right now. Why? Because after COVID-19, we now know, is a trigger. And people are not fully recovering. This is of monumental proportions. The numbers in this country, which Oven maybe can speak a little bit about later, can go from anywhere from 10 million people, which is the CDC estimate for long COVID, up to 110, I believe it is, 110 million people in the United States. This is monumental. This will completely change our healthcare system. It will completely change the way we treat one another, our medicine, science, the way we look at the future, and the way we look at one another. And I want, with this documentary film, with this campaign, what I care the absolute most about, aside from getting a treatment, aside from getting a cure, aside from being able to treat people and see people in the meantime before we even get to that end goal, I care about us all having compassion for one another. That's what I care about. Because that is ultimately the beginning and the end of what we're trying to achieve. And that's something the public can all participate in. So what we're doing is we're launching this campaign here in Santa Barbara. We're gonna go all the way across the United States, stopping in different communities along the way. It's gonna be really fun. By the way, this is gonna be a funny movie. I know no one believes that right now, I swear. When we pitch it in Hollywood, it's a little different, you guys. And so we're gonna make it fun, because when it's fun and it's approachable, people will love it. We want people to love us. When they love us, they will help us. And that is our theory. Now, I started and ran an international film festival, and thank you. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Frank. Oh yeah, look, I got a lot of people here who helped me with that. Megan, Frank, our creative director, lots of amazing people. What a great team. And so, you know, we started that, and I have to tell you, every time I stood outside of the theater doors, I got to see people come out and greet me. And you know what? I know what films do well, because I was the person there saying hello to everyone when they walked out of the theater. The films that push themselves to the edge do the best of any genre. The ones that fully embrace who they are and what they're doing. And we're gonna fully embrace that we are an awesome, important pop culture phenomena that is gonna take over the world, and that's what we're gonna do. What we need is we need your support. We are looking for additional executive producers to come on board. If you yourself want to be a part of it or know someone who does, just come and talk to us. There are cards on the table. People can donate and get involved, but this is a grassroots movement. We need every single one of you in the room to be a part of it, and I am thrilled to be here. So, with that, I'd love to pass it on to Mike.
Hey, our next speaker, I've known for about 25 years. We met a long time ago. He's a former California State Assembly member, Santa Barbara City Council member, and currently member of the County Board of Supervisors, and just an all-around good guy, Dos Williams.
Thanks so much, Mike. Well, I am honored to be here because I feel like there is some commonality between problems that we as a society have that are difficult to address. So I would say, in addition, Mike, to the fact that we don't joke about it being a sign, I would say that the other sign is that when people feel like a problem is unsolvable, they create a sort of rationalization with themselves. Well, If it's not solvable, we don't need to do anything about it. Right? That's how this works in people's minds. And I see it all the time in two other categories: climate change work and housing, right? In this town, right? What's the first thing people say if they're confronted by somebody who can't afford to live here anymore and has to leave? They think, well, we'll never build our way out of this problem. Right? As if each person as an individual doesn't matter. We have to have 100% solution for it to matter, right? See the same phenomenon in climate change, and you definitely see the same problem in addressing disease, right? Folks feeling like we want a solution. Well, a solution isn't the only thing that we strive for, right? Every single person that is helped is a victory. Every single person where there is prevention is a victory. At least in my world, the ethics need to be looked at differently, where the ethics of each person that is saved or helped is a victory. We don't need to solve the world's problems, each one of them 100% for it to matter. Each person is a victory. And my public health staff, so the county obviously has been your friend, your companion throughout COVID. One of the other phenomena of this is that people, what's typical when they go through even mild or heavy trauma, they just want to forget about it, forget that it ever happened. And so both because you want to create solutions for people, and also because you also have the courage to talk about something that a lot of society is ready to put or create an illusion that they can put behind them. I really respect that. My public health staff would want to make sure that I also tell you and remind you to tell folks, vaccinated folks are still less likely statistically to get long COVID, and that reinfections exacerbate your chances of having that misfortune. And so just because the disease has now become endemic does not mean that we shouldn't take steps to prevent its spread and make sure that the public has the requisite information. The county still is your partner in this, and while we continue to have problems staffing all of our public health positions, mainly because of that issue of our housing market, we will stand with you, because this is probably also not going to be the last pandemic that we have to deal with as a society. We are with you. We've learned a lot from the last 4 years, and we also want to be part of the role of spreading the word. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I'd just like to say we are here for Santa Barbara as well, and we are ready, willing, and able to brainstorm with you in whatever capacity we can.
He's the director of public health in Santa Barbara County. I'm so happy for him to come in tonight. And I just asked him a question. Do you think this documentary is going to help people such as the people who are suffering in Santa Barbara County? And I will let him take the answer.
Well, thank you very much. Good to be here. This is month 6 in Santa Barbara. I come to you by way of Michigan. And I feel that every time I say that, I have to apologize for bringing the bad weather with me. But it's a beautiful place to be, and I'm so happy to be here. And as I am getting my feel and getting to know more about the county and all the great things that are happening, I am so happy that opportunities like these. I do apologize for not being here for the whole thing. I was at UCSB for another very important event, which is health equity, which we all should be talking about. But one of the beautiful things that I enjoyed about reading about the event is that for many of us, especially when we are encountering things that we do not know, the unknown is always scary, and it's always, we feel apprehension when we are uncertain. And uncertainty certainly, no pun intended, was something that we encountered in the last 3 years. And by putting a name to something that we identify it, it helps us fight it, it helps us cope with it, and it helps us in finding help once we identify what is happening. So thank you for this and showing people that this is not something that we do not know. It is something that certainly we can work through. And I'm not here to steal any of your thunder, but if there are any questions related to the health department or anything that I can help you with, then I'll be more than happy to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. And I think since Dr. Hamami was not here earlier, I think I should retell my jokes. No. Okay. And we'll start with Ovid. He is the head of an organization called Solve ME. And I think it's as aggressive and effective as any organization like this in the country. And my hat's off to you. My first question would be, tell us about Solve ME and exactly what are you doing with that company?
Thank you, Willie, and thank you all for coming here this evening. Solve ME, and this is part of what Chesley was already talking about. Solve ME is a patient advocacy group. We're a national organization that started in many ways because of the stories that you've already heard. It was back in the 80s where there were a number of viral outbreaks that left people struggling for months, and in some cases years, and for many people for the rest of their lives. So the organization started really as a patient support group. This was at the time before the internet, and patients were struggling alone, and they were looking for a way to find some support, find some information, and that's why Solve was created. It had a different name at the time, so going back to the name issue. And very often when I'm asked, what do you do? And what does Solve does? And so it's hard because we can't even say chronic fatigue syndrome because it doesn't really mean anything. Most people will tell me, oh yeah, I'm fatigued too. And myalgic encephalomyelitis is even more difficult to pronounce. So I think what we really need to really understand is that when you saw Chesley, very often the first question is, but you don't look sick, right? So this is really the challenge, is that we're dealing with something that is invisible. And so what Solve does is really to create awareness for the disease. A lot of our work is advocating at the federal level, mostly to get more funding and more resources for research and other policies that can help people in their real lives. And we also support research.
Do you have someone then working in Congress?
One of our staff is she's leading. Her name is Emily Taylor. If anyone met her. She's really our advocacy person. And so we have a lot of connections, and over the years we built bridges with members of Congress who believe in this and really want to support. I'll mention one more thing about that, which is that when COVID started, our community was very sensitive to the idea that COVID-19 could lead to what we now call long COVID. So it should not have been a surprise to anyone. People that tell you that, oh, they were surprised by that, they just probably didn't listen to patients, for a generation, or maybe for more than that. Because these diseases were always with us. As long as humans and viruses coexist, there are always diseases that leave people who don't recover. So in May of 2020, our organization was already working to get Congress to pay attention. And it was exactly 3 years ago. It was the end of May of 2020 where we got Representative Jamie Raskin to introduce a bill. And yeah, we were lucky that we got him before he got busy with other things. But Jamie Raskin is the member of Congress who has the NIH in his district. So he obviously, had another reason why he wanted to make sure that there's more funding to the NIH to study what at that time we called COVID-19 long haulers and the ME Act. So if you look it up, you'll find House Resolution 7057 that ultimately became the vehicle to deliver more funding to the NIH, actually way more than we asked for. And the NIH got more than $1 billion to study long COVID, which I think we're now beginning to see some of the fruits of this work, not as fast as we would like, but that's part of being advocates who are here in the long run.
But how is your organization connected to Chesley?
We're part of a community, and we know each other. In fact, part of the challenge of COVID is that we couldn't really get to see people in person. There are a lot of people that I've been working with now for 3 years that I still had not met in person. And of course, people in this community, in many cases, are more cautious. And so, but it's a very, very close community, and we immediately recognize when there is something that's in common, and we share the same passion for making a difference here.
And this documentary could do a lot for the people you represent.
Absolutely, and I think it's we use different names, myalgic encephalomyelitis or long COVID. In many ways, they converge. But it's really, in many ways, one of the same. And I think that we need to think about it as a broader space. For some people, like my sister, it started with mononucleosis, also called the kissing disease. She had that disease and never really recovered, triggered by the Epstein-Barr virus, which now know is also part of the reason that people develop MS later in life. So viruses are really part of us as humans, and we actually carry many viruses within our DNA, remnants of longer history. So it is really not so much about the specific virus. Obviously viruses have specific effects, but the long hauler part is really our immune response.
Thank you. One thing that I forgot to say is there's another issue here besides the human suffering. The newest information out is that at this point, the expenses from long COVID, from people not working because of long COVID, now outpaces the expenses for diabetes. It's almost $4 trillion. So if you can't seem to, for people who can't get around the human suffering, let's bring the numbers to them and say, you want to ruin the American economy? Let's keep going the way we are and ignore this disease. Now, a member of my family, close member of my family, came down with something like this, and we went so many places. When we say it was just the two of us, and I would go this doctor, this specialist, that specialist, top specialists in the world, and we just got nowhere. We got somewhere when we got to the doctors who adhered to the same kind of program that our next guest explained to me on the phone. I was so excited to hear his plan, his idea for how medicine should be practiced in the future. And I hope to heck that people listen to him. I'd like to introduce Dr. Joseph Smith. And I'm going to let him explain his philosophy of medicine, his philosophy of treating people, because I think it's critical if we're going to go forward with ME and long haulers and actually defeat this disease.
I can't tell you how many people I've met this year that have been completely pancaked by COVID. They're out of work. They basically have lost all the relationships in their life, and they're basically completely stuck. And you're talking about the future of medicine. What I want to say is, Chesley mentioned earlier and Ovid mentioned earlier about like these mysterious viruses that happened. And we can talk about viruses, we can talk about head traumas, we can talk about environmental toxicity, we can talk about pre-existing autoimmunity, we can talk about high adverse childhood event scores, we can talk about PTSD. And what we need to understand is that the name matters, okay? You get a diagnosis, okay? But once you get that diagnosis, the most important question in my clinic is why? Why do you have this diagnosis? Why did you get COVID? And suddenly, something went wrong and never came back. What I want you to know is for all these chronic issues, it's not harder, it's just more complex. And for every person out there that has this situation going on, there is an opportunity for recovery by understanding why. Why? And so first we have to get medicine to acknowledge it's a thing. But my biggest concern with medicine is once they find the thing, they want to create a protocol for what to do for it. They're looking for one drug or one medication. The problem with this condition is it's multifactorial. It requires a history, an exam, diagnostics, labs, and it's like a Rubik's Cube. Once you find one of the pieces and you do the right thing, you might get one side of the Rubik's Cube to match. Maybe you work with their Epstein-Barr virus and now they're feeling a little bit better, but now they have a food sensitivity or their PTSD was triggered because they're in a toxic relationship. Your genes, when you have this condition, think that that's the right thing that your body's supposed to do because of your environment. Okay, so instead of focusing on the condition, we focus on why that is and try to create conditions that are right for recovery and focusing on barriers to recovery instead of a disease. My biggest fear is that this takes off and then there's all this research and money piled into a model that is focused on treating the condition, where the problem is there's a departure from health and vitality, and we need to remove barriers for that instead of just treating the condition. So that's what I think is going on, and I don't think it's the future. I think it's happening now. Remember that medical practice is a science and it's an art, and there are some artists out there doing it right now, and you just got to find them.
And I just want to add one more thing, which is that people like you, who first of all validate, listen to their patients, that's really, and any healthcare provider can do that. I think making sure that you listen to what people tell you, they're not making this up. And so the mere recognition, the validation, and the acknowledgement that the experience that people share is real, and that's something that all of us can do. And I think it's really, that's the first step. And I think if all of us leave here tonight, knowing that when we listen to someone else, or if we tell our story and we're being validated with compassion, that's the first step to healing. So I hope that that's at least what every healthcare professional can do, and hopefully they will embrace your philosophy. But even in the absence of that, that will be a major step forward.
Diseases. Why do we say they're related? They may be second cousins or third cousins, like cancer. Why do we say cancer is all related and we put it all under one? When face cancer can be completely different than any other kind of cancer. I am a journalist, not a doctor.
Well, I'll start. I think actually the analogy to cancer is probably helpful. I think that 50, 60 years ago, we did think about cancer as one thing, right? It was, but we always thought about it as, okay, it's a breast cancer or colon cancer. And of course, now we understand, the deeper molecular mechanisms that drive them. There's a lot of similarity. So for me, the reason to be more inclusive is that I think we get more, first of all, you get more attention instead of, splitting things to different smaller areas. You just get more attention. I think what's in common is a lot of these diseases are invisible. And I think that's part of the reason to put them together, because you do get more visibility. And I think, as Joe already said, there's a lot of overlap. And so by looking at things that may be called differently, they actually have a lot in common. It really does help you to ultimately focus on the individual and understand why do they have something that looks like that and slightly different than someone else. So I think that's the reason, and ultimately the awareness, the attention will help us to figure it out. So for me, that's the reason to do that.
So your question is, why do we need this? Can you rephrase the question again?
The question is, why are we deciding today? I'm not saying it's wrong, but if I'm going to go out to the world and say, this is, our new P60, why are we putting these particular diseases together, or viruses, under this particular umbrella? What's your medical answer?
Well, I think that the specific, so like he was mentioning, there's a Venn diagram that, if you look in my brain when I'm thinking about a case, okay, what's the diagnostic criteria for myalgic encephalomyelitis versus the diagnostic criteria for long COVID? Okay, well, in myalgic encephalomyelitis, you have muscle pain, fatigue, insomnia, or depression that lasts for a certain period of time that doesn't have an organic cause. They're like, I don't know what caused this. They're looking at it, they're like, we're not sure. Okay, COVID-19, it doesn't necessarily have to be depression, muscle pain, fatigue. It might be vertigo. It might be acid reflux. It might be numbness in your left hand, but it went on for 6 months after long COVID. So the idea is the diagnosis is important because it's based on the history of the patient, and the diagnosis will help us determine what are the factors that could be contributing to what's going on. And without knowing what's going on, we're just like doing a Hail Mary every time we do a treatment. So the idea is you can identify specifically what's happening, then you can actually render an effective remedy that's lasting and economical. Whereas if you're just treating fatigue, you could be treating chronic Lyme, you could be treating anemia, you could be treating Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, hypothyroidism, you could be treating depression. So the diagnosis actually matters because it helps the practitioner localize where the actual problem is. So I think it's important to say in myalgic encephalomyelitis, okay, that's a constellation of symptoms that is pervasive in other conditions, but what makes it unique is the timing and its lack of response to particular interventions. What does that mean about the person is the next important question. I think that's where medicine's falling short, in my opinion. I'm part of that. Okay, we're not asking the question why, we're asking the question, well, what is it? Okay, well, what if all these people get diagnosed and then there's no hope for them because there's no actual, researched remedy? And what's the problem with research? Research is designed to pick one variable and then prove if it works or not. So do you understand, if we're relying on research, which is important, research is designed to pick one remedy for one variable, and then how did that go? Well, how many people have one variable in ME? How many people have one variable in chronic Lyme or chronic Epstein-Barr? Okay, they don't. So that's the issue, is we're running into a problem in how medicine is organized. And medicine is amazing for what it's amazing for, but there's just a number of people that aren't responding. And what I'm hopeful for is an evolution in how medicine allows doctors to think instead of just being focused on a protocol for one researched variable. We need to be able to think outside of what's researched and be able to put things together, because there could be 10 research papers, and what order do they go in? You go to your ATM machine and you poke in the wrong number, or the right numbers but in the wrong order, you get nothing. It's the same thing with case management. If I do a viral protocol first and they have a concussion, nothing happens. Okay? But if they needed a concussion rehab first, you see what I'm saying? But if they needed a concussion rehab and their virus is ravaging them and I do nothing for the virus, what I do for a concussion is going to do nothing. It's the right thing at the right time and the right amount. The diagnosis is critical to understanding what are the constellation of systems involved. It doesn't tell us what to do. That's the art of practice.
Public may not get humor when it comes to an illness like ME. This is wonderful. The patients love it because all of a sudden it's validating them where they're not getting any validation. And it means a lot. I mean, those cartoons went all over the country to support groups and organizations. We need more. Okay.
And these are from, John, what decade are these from?
Those are from the early and mid 90s.